In this video, you're going to learn about array lists. Array lists are similar to arrays in that they store large amounts of data, but the big advantage of array lists over arrays is that you can add and remove elements from an array list. So you don't have to set the size and be stuck with that size when you create your array list. So an array list is actually a class in Java, unlike an array, which isn't actually a class. So you can look up the Java docs for array list, and you can see that here. And you'll notice that there's this sort of angle bracket E, and this is a new syntactical element that we'll talk about when we see the example code. So I'm going to move over to our example. And the first thing to note is whenever you're using ArrayList, you have to add this import statement because ArrayList is not one of the classes that's automatically included whenever you compile your Java code. So you have to include this import statement, and this is coming from this line right here, java.util.ArrayList. So whenever you forget what import statement goes with what class, you can always look for it here in the Java docs. So once we have this import statement, we can start to create ArrayList objects. So when we create an ArrayList object, we write the name of the class, and then in the angle brackets, we should specify what type of data we're going to be storing in our ArrayList. Similar to when you create an array, you specify what type of data you're going to be storing in the array. So we put that data type in our angle brackets. So here I'm creating an array list of strings. It's important to note that you can only put the name of a class here. We cannot have an array list of primitives. There is a workaround for that. So if you, for example, wanted an array list of ints, we couldn't actually write int here, but we could write integer, capital I integer. That's the integer class, which is what we call a wrapper class for ints. Similar with double, there's a capital D double class, and same thing with Boolean. So all of our primitives do have classes that go with them, so we can work around that, but we do need to put the name of a class here. We can't have an array list of primitives. So after we have our array list and the type of data that's going to be in it, this entire part right here is actually the data type for our array list. So then the next part of declaring our variable is to put the variable name. So strs1, then our equal sign, and then this is going to be just like calling the constructor for any other class. We have to write new, and then the name of the constructor, so that matches the name of our class, ArrayList, and then we're going to repeat this data type right here. So this data type needs to match what we put over here. And then these parentheses are because we are calling the constructor. We're calling the noArgs constructor. So if I go back to our Java docs, in the constructor section, we can see there are 3 constructors. This first one is the one that we're going to be using, and you can see it creates an empty list. So no data is pre-populated, just empty list. It says an initial capacity of 10. You don't have to worry about the capacity. That will be updated automatically. So this line creates an array list of strings. No strings in it yet. It's empty, but it's ready to go, ready to store some strings for us. So then we can print it out to see what that did. And whenever we print out an object, println automatically calls toString for that object. And in the case of ArrayList, the toString method is really nice. It will return a string with square brackets around it and all the elements of the array list listed out inside of it. So no more writing loops to print out all the elements when you're working with an array list. The toString method will give you that string. So here, we just have empty square brackets because we didn't add anything to our array list. So it's just an empty array list. Now there is another way to make array lists. This is not the preferred method, but you should know that it works. It's syntactically correct. It's just poor programming practice. So we could create an array list like this one, where we don't specify the data type of what data we're going to be putting in it. So we're just saying it's going to be an array list. We're calling the constructor for array list, again, not specifying what kind of data is going to be in our array list. So that lets us put any object in our array list. We could put string objects, we could put ints, we could mix them together, integers, the integer class, not ints. But we could mix all different types of objects together. Even if that's what we want to do and we want to be able to put any kind of object into our array list, we need to make that explicit by using this angle bracket syntax rather than just leaving it to default, because then people who are looking at your code may not know if that's actually what you wanted or you just forgot to specify the data type. So while this works and it does create an empty array list, which you can see right here, this is not a good practice to get into. You want to get into the habit of always specifying your data type in these angle brackets. So to recap, we create an array list just like any other object. We put our data type, our variable name, equals, new, and we call the constructor. That creates an empty array list, and then we will add elements to it, which we will see later on.